Hello, dear friends. I am the Erev Yom Kippur. The afternoon before Yom Kippur, I'd like to say a few words relating to Rosh Hashanah that was just commemorated recently. Rosh Hashanah, Jewish New Year, the first of Tishrei. So the first Mishnah says, Arba'a Rashi Shanim Hem. The Mishnah of Rosh Hashanah says there are four beginnings of the year. You have the first of Nisan, which is the beginning of the months. It's also the beginning of the way the kings of Israel would count their years. In antiquity, calendars were according to the kings of various countries. And the kings of Israel would count from the first of Nisan, inaugurating each new year of their reign. And then you have the first of Elul, is called the Rosh Hashana, the beginning of the year, for Ma'aser Behema, the tithe of the animals. If a person has cattle, so 1 out of 10 is supposed to be given to the temple, or can be redeemed, and that money can be used to buy something for the temple, and it's usually given to the Kohen. It's called Ma'aser Behema. And the way you figure, and it's when the animal is 1 year old, and 1 year old is calculated when it reaches the first of Elul. Then you have, of course, Maser, the Maser of, excuse me, not the Maser, the Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year for the trees. And today we commemorate this on Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of Shavat. It's actually a controversy between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, where there's the first or the 15th. And the 15th day of Shvat then is to calculate, for instance, the years of the Orla. When you plant a fruit tree, for the first 3 years, you're not allowed to benefit from the fruit. And on the fourth year, only a Kohen can eat it, but today we don't even do that. Kodesh Hilulim. From the fifth year, you can benefit from the fruit. And the years are counted based on every time you reach the 15th day of Shavat. And then the final one is the first of Tishrei, which is called Rosh Hashanah for the years, how we calculate the years. Now, I think I've said before that these four Rosh Hashanahs are very interesting because they seem to reflect what the Greeks referred to as four levels in nature, and this became sort of a truism of antiquity. It was adopted in multiple places, also in Jewish philosophy, also in Kabbalah, that the world is based on three levels: minerals, plants, animals, and human beings. Minerals, the difference between a mineral and the plant is that a plant can grow and a mineral, a rock, cannot. Minerals and plants. Between plants and animals, animals can move and plants cannot. Animals have an anima, soul, so they can move. The difference between animals and mankind is that man has logic, has logos, meaning has intellect, and therefore has the ability to make decisions and free will, which animals do not in the same sense. So these are the four levels, and these four levels, each one is reflected by a different Rosh Hashanah. The Rosh Hashanah for mankind, as I said, for kings of Israel is the first of Nisan. The Rosh Hashanah for animals is the first of Elul. Rosh Hashanah for trees, right, plants, vegetation, is the 15th day of Shavat. The Rosh Hashanah for the world, or for time, meaning the years, is from the beginning of Tishrei. By the way, in the Bible, in the beginning in Hebrew is Bereshit, and the letters of Bereshit in Hebrew are Be'alef Tishrei, on the first day of Tishrei. So what does this mean? Now, the interesting thing is that Rosh Hashanah, according to this, is the beginning of the counting of years. First of all, that's very significant. In our tradition, as mentioned in the Talmud in Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Hashana is not the commemoration of when God created the universe. It is the commemoration of when God created Adam and Eve, mankind. Now, in the Bible, that's on the sixth day. So you might say, okay, big deal. So it's for today, we're 5,786 years. So add another 5 days you got when the world was created. Of course, that's based on the assumption that the world was created in 6 days times 24 hours. That assumption is not come to very lightly or very easily because of the fact that there are various points of view, especially among the Kabbalists, which seem to hold other positions, that the days of creation might have been quite lengthy. Like Rav Shalom Eliyashi from the 19th century says that possibly thousands of years each one. And there are others who say it might have been beyond time, and that time might not even existed in the same way in the 6 days of creation. By the way, the term day in the Bible itself is not necessarily a 24-hour period. I'll give you an example. In the book of Genesis in Bereshit, when Abraham's servant goes to look for a wife for Isaac, so he comes to the house of Laban, in Syria, in Aram Tzova, in Aram. And of course, he asks God for a sign, and the sign is the girl who shall offer you water into your camels. That's the right one. And Rivka comes for the well. She sees Abraham's servant, and she says, let me help you. I'll give you water and give your camels. And he's amazed, and he tells Laban the story how this happened. And Laban says, okay, it's from God. You can have Rivka for your master's son. We know he is, family member, not a problem. But then Abraham's servant takes all the gold and silver and the jewelry that he brought and gives it to Rebekah. And to Laban, all he gives, to Laban and Betuel, Betuel is the father, Laban's the brother, he gives just the fruit. So they're not so happy about that. And Betuel says, Teshev itano hanara yamim osor, which means, you know what, let the girl remain here for a while, either yamim, which literally means days, or 10. And all the commentaries say that here days means years, meaning let her stay a few more years to grow up, or at least 10 months. So there you have an example where days does not mean periods of time of 24 hours. Also in the book of Leviticus, in Numbers, when they're talking about the Jubilee and the time that if a person wants to sell their property until the Jubilee, also you have the term there of Yamim pertaining to years. And the most obvious thing, of course, is that in the Bereshit story, after all, the way we calculate a day of 24 hours refers to the rotation of the earth on its axis vis-a-vis the sun. So really for a day, you need the earth, you need its rotation, and you need the sun. But if you look in the Genesis story, the sun, the moon, the stars are only created on day 4. And despite that, the Bible says it was evening, it was morning, day 1, day 2, day 3. Anyhow, so our enumeration of 5,786 is actually from the 6th day of creation, or I usually put it, when Adam and Eve were pushed out of the Garden of Eden. And that's when the regular world begins. And that's our counting. Abba Yossi ben Chalafta, a Tanaic scholar, after the destruction of the temple. So he basically figures out or calculates the amount of years from the time Adam and Eve left the garden until his day, and we continue that to our day, and we come to 5,786 years. But we don't really have any calculation about the 6 days themselves because of course, the argument whether the 6 days are actual. There are opinions that say it can possibly be also 6 times 24 hours, but if you look among the Kabbalists, they are in the minority. Nachmanides is one of those opinions, for instance. Getting back to this. Now, the interesting thing here is Rosh Hashana is referred to the counting of the years. Now, if you look into the Torah, when the Torah talks about Rosh Hashana, It refers to it as Yom HaZikaron, the day of memory, the day of remembering. And we read from the Torah, Hashem pakaret Sarah, from Genesis, Breshit, and God remembered Sarah to give her a child, which means that's not when the child was born. It's when God decided that she deserves a child. And that day was Rosh Hashana, because it's the day when God remembers. And we can remember too. God remembers us, hopefully for the good. And we remember God to keep a connection. But it's called Yom HaZikaron. In another place, it's called Yom Zichron Teruah, the day of memory and remembering the blast of the shofar, the ram's horn. So what's this thing with memory? Why is it called the day of memory? Why not the day of God's kingship, the day that we renew our belief in God or something like that? Or the day of taking stock like Yom Kippur, even though it's slightly different than Yom Kippur. There's no confessional prayer. Why the day of memory? Well, first of all, if it does commemorate Adam and Eve's beginning, human beings have a special connection to memory. We have a connection to time, right? The beginning of the years. We're the ones who take time seriously. We calculate time. We plan time. We try not to waste time. We say time is money. It's very important time. Now, animals also have a sense of time, but as one sociologist said, it's more in an operational way. Have a cat here on my balcony. If I feed them at 8:15 in the morning, next morning they'll be there at 8:15. They know when the time is and the feeding time. In that sense, yes. They see the sun rising and the sun setting. They understand that these things continue. So they do have that operational concept of time. But as human beings, time is so important to us. We can remember experiences we had in time and the emotional impact of these experiences and the meaning that the experience meant, what it meant to us. And then we commemorate that time with a holiday, possibly a day of mourning. Time becomes a very important part of our lives because we have consciousness, and that consciousness we can ponder and think about things that happen to us. We can understand it gives us meaning, and therefore, when we know what happened in the past, it can help us for how to work in the future. And we can take stock and we can learn from those experiences, even the experiences we didn't experience, but others told us about. So we have a special relationship to time, which is very unique to the human experience, possibly because that day that commemorates the beginning of mankind is called Yom HaZikaron, the day of remembering. Or as the Mishnah says, when we calculate time, the years. So it's a Yom HaZikaron. God remembers us. We remember God. And we try to make the new year, more significant than the one before. Shalom, shalom, Gmar Chatima Tova. We all be inscribed in the book of life.